Welcome to the Great Fire of London, where the night starts with a flicker and ends in catastrophe. You don't know it yet, but everything around you is about to burn. The fire will chase you through alleys, swallow cathedrals and melt stone like butter. And by the time it's over, London won't just be destroyed, it will be reborn. If the sound of church bells turning into alarm bells and the glow on the horizon creeping closer with every breath helps lull you to sleep, go ahead and like the video and hit subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what hour the fire found you running barefoot through your dreams. There's comfort in knowing we've all survived a disaster or two. Now dim the lights, get cozy, and let's step into a world where panic spread faster than flames, help arrived too late, and somehow they still called it an act of God. You wake to the sound of nothing, that peculiar stillness of a city asleep, not the calm of peace, but the heavy hush of breath held before something shatters. Outside your window, the narrow vein of Pudding Lane dozes under the weight of its own darkness. The heat from an endless summer still lingers in the cobbles, thick and clinging, as if even the stones forgot how to cool off. The baker's girl, Hannah, has just put out her candle. You saw her light it not long ago. The flicker in the window, one floor down, a brief and innocent spark. But it's gone now. The house is silent. Everything is still. Then the smell hits you, not bread, not the sour, crusty perfume that usually bleeds out from Farriner's ovens. No, this is sharp, metallic, and wrong. Like something is burning that was never meant to burn. You throw off the covers. Not that you slept much. The air has been too dry, too hot, too suspicious. Your feet hit the floor just as the first scream rises from next door. There's smoke in the stairwell. The neighbours are shouting from the rooftops. Someone's banging a pan with a ladle. The ancient signal for disaster. You look outside and watch the fire move. Not flicker, not dance. Move. Like it's hunting. It leaps from timber to timber like it's got legs, skipping through the sky like it's late for an appointment with hell. Sparks dart across the alley and land on the roof opposite. A child wails. A window bursts. The fire is alive, and it's hungry. The truth of it is this. The city had been waiting to burn. The fire began just after midnight on Sunday, September 2nd, 1666, in a bakery belonging to Thomas Farriner. Not in the oven itself, but likely from a stray ember that landed on a careless pile of brushwood. Babbins, they were called. Dry bundles stuffed in the bakehouse yard. And once it found a spark, it didn't take long to get creative. Farriner's teenage son was the first to spot the fire. He woke the family and they scrambled out of an upstairs window and onto a neighbour's roof, shrieking warnings into the dark. Their maid wasn't so lucky. Trapped, terrified, and unsure which way to run, she became the fire's first victim, and far from the last. What made it worse, much worse, was that London had been prepped for catastrophe like a kindling bonfire waiting for a match. The houses in Pudding Lane jutted out at the top, their upper stories leaning into each other like neighbours whispering secrets. It was a medieval building trick called jettying, designed to maximise space without blocking the street below. But it also meant you could probably pass a tankard of ale from one attic to another, or in this case, a ball of fire. As if tight spacing weren't enough, the walls were made of wattle and daub, a quaint combination of mud, straw and wishful thinking. In good condition, it could resist heat, but in these overcrowded, under-maintained alleyways, it might as well have been dry tinder dipped in bacon fat, and then there was the wind. By 2 a.m, the breeze had become a gust, and the gust had turned into an accomplice. Flames were no longer just spreading, they were being thrown, roof to roof, street to street, and no one, not the mayor, not the baker, not the pigeons frying mid-air, had a clue how to stop it. London had burned before, but never quite like this. You've run 3 blocks with a bundle of shoes under one arm and your neighbour's screaming child under the other. You're not entirely sure which one is heavier, but the shoes complain less. The bells are ringing now. First just St Magnus the Martyr, and then the whole chorus of London's churches joins in, their voices cracked and frantic. The fire's not creeping anymore, it's charging. Behind you, sparks drift like confetti from a festival you never asked for. Pigeons swirl through the smoke, unwilling to leave their perches until it's too late. Their wings catch fire mid-flight, turning the sky into a grotesque fireworks display. One slams into the roof in front of you and drops like a stone. Another thuds against your shoulder. It's still warm. You turn onto Fish Street Hill and realise you're not running away from the fire, you're running alongside it. The whole street is a funnel of wind and heat. A pub called the Star Inn has just exploded. You didn't see flames touch it. The building simply burst open, like it had decided it couldn't stand the suspense. Someone grabs you shouting, "To the river!" You nod like it makes sense. You're not sure anything makes sense anymore. By 3 a.m, Fish Street Hill was ablaze. The fire had jumped from Pudding Lane to nearby taverns, homes and markets. It was moving so fast that it wasn't simply spreading, it was erasing. Entire structures were igniting spontaneously before the fire even touched them. Why? Because they were packed with materials that turned a bad situation into an explosive one. Barrels of hay, crates of paper and tar, yes, tar, had been stockpiled in the Thameside warehouses. These buildings weren't just flammable, they were pre-soaked in catastrophe. When the fire reached them, the heat alone was enough to trigger flashovers, temperatures skyrocketing past 1,000 degrees, hot enough to melt iron, stone, and the last thread of hope. People started pouring their milk into the flames, others tossed in their beer. A few, in an act of sheer desperation or spite, even resorted to urinating on the fire. It didn't help. Panic roared louder than the fire itself. There was no fire service, no organised response, no coordinated evacuation. Just neighbours with buckets, carts, and the collective realisation that everyone was on their own now. And at the top of the city, Mayor Thomas Bloodworth surveyed the chaos, scratched his head, and offered up the single most regrettable comment in firefighting history. A woman could piss it out. Spoiler, she could not. Bloodworth refused to authorise the demolition of nearby homes to create fire breaks, the one method that might have slowed the blaze, but the homes belonged to wealthy merchants, and the mayor, bless him, didn't want to upset them. So instead, he did nothing, and for the rest of eternity he'd be remembered not for governing a city but for letting it burn out of political convenience. By dawn, the pigeons were dead, the warehouses were gone, and Samuel Pepys, official recorder of disaster, scandal and oddly satisfying dinners, had taken a boat down the Thames and started writing. The fire, he wrote, was moving with the wind. The flames seemed to breathe, propelled by a force bigger than London itself. It had been just a few hours, but the city was already breaking. You've lost track of time. The sky's red, but you're not sure if it's sunrise or just more firelight. Smoke is painting your lungs from the inside. You cough so hard it rattles your bones. You've made it to Lombard Street, where the money lives. The homes here have iron knockers, marble staircases, and windows big enough to signal Neptune. But none of that matters now, because here, even the rich are sweating, and not just from the heat. Goldsmiths are dragging strongboxes into the street. Bankers are yelling at servants to grab the ledgers and leave the silver. A man is sprinting down the cobbles with a painting under one arm and a confused goose under the other. And behind them, behind you, the fire is catching up. The warehouses exploded hours ago. Now the blaze is moving differently. It's smarter, hungrier. It licks the rooftops of Lombard Street like it's taking a taste before the main course. You watch as one house, a mansion really, simply folds in on itself. The roof caves, the walls give up, the flames shoot out like victory banners. You'd flee, but you're frozen. Because in that moment you realise something. London is not going to win this. By Monday afternoon, barely 36 hours since it started, the fire was devouring some of the wealthiest streets in the city. Lombard Street, Gracechurch Street. The very arteries that pumped gold through London's financial heart were now nothing but smoke and soot. One of the men who lived there was Robert Viner, a goldsmith turned banker and close friend of King Charles II. When the fire came, he didn't panic. He planned. His jewels and ledgers were loaded onto carts and sent to Windsor Castle, escorted by men on horseback like a royal caravan of fiscal paranoia. His home, of course, was incinerated, but his money, safe. This was the beginning of a new kind of disaster, one where wealth couldn't protect you from fire, but it could buy you a head start. Elsewhere, merchants tried to do the same, but the roads were clogged. The boatmen on the Thames were charging extortionate rates. Furniture was being ferried across the river like sacred relics. People flung paintings and chamber pots, and in one case a live pig into the water, hoping something, anything, would be spared. And all the while the fire kept growing. Every hour another 100 homes, another dozen shops. The inferno had become something close to a living thing, not just spreading but hunting, feeding on timber, pitch, books, spices, and panic. The Royal Exchange, London's glittering stock market where silks and spices once flowed like currency, was next. The building went up like it had been dipped in lamp oil. The East India Company's spices stored in the crypts turned the air itself into a choking perfume. Eyewitnesses claimed the smell of burning pepper clung to their throats for hours. Some swore it still did years later. By the end of the second day, the fire front was a mile wide. Smoke clouded the sun. Eyewitnesses wrote that the sky turned crimson. The wind howled. And in the chaos, the boundaries between class, power and property vanished. Whether you were a shoemaker or a nobleman, you were now part of the same frenzied stampede, scrambling to stay one step ahead of the flames. This wasn't just a fire anymore, it was a revolution, carried on ash and wind. The night is no longer dark, it's orange now, flickering and stuttering like it's trying to decide whether to whisper or scream. But the wind has already made the decision for it. You press yourself against a wall, hoping the flames will choose someone else. They don't. The fire isn't picking favourites. It's licking the shutters, curling under doors, spitting cinders like a furious god with no sense of proportion. The wind shifts, and suddenly the house across the alley combusts in one breathless whoosh. It doesn't catch fire, it erupts. A woman's voice breaks through the noise, high, panicked and short-lived. You see her silhouette in the window for a second, then nothing, just shards of glass in the street and the smell of burning linen. You duck into a side passage, only to find that it's already glowing with heat. The fire is faster than your feet. You thought fire climbed upward, like a ladder. You thought it needed time, coaxing, fuel, this question mark. This isn't a fireplace gone rogue. This is something feral. It jumps. It hunts. It learns dot. And the wind. Oh, the wind, it doesn't howl. It bellows. It carries the fire like a secret being passed from rooftop to rooftop, whispering, burn faster. By 3 a.m, the great fire had evolved into something far beyond a building blaze. It had become a wind-fed inferno, a creature of atmosphere and momentum. The summer of 1666 had been long, hot, and parched. Rain hadn't touched the city in weeks. The timber frames of London's homes were dry enough to snap like bones. Add in a stiff easterly wind, and you have the medieval equivalent of napalm distribution. The wind that night turned Pudding Lane into a launch pad. It fanned embers from house to house like a bellows in a forge. Roofs ignited before the flames even touched them. Sparks leapt whole streets, gliding through the air like demonic moths. Modern fire science has a word for this: ember attack. When fires burn hot enough, long enough, they shed pieces of themselves into the air, burning fragments that ride the wind, land on rooftops, and ignite secondary fires miles away. In a city with wooden gutters, straw-filled attics, and no fireproofing, this process doesn't just spread a fire, it multiplies it. Samuel Pepys, our perpetually startled diarist, would later write that he saw flames leaping from house to house as if the whole city was made of dry straw. He wasn't exaggerating. The fire, by now, was no longer a linear problem. It was expanding in every direction at once, sideways, upward, even backward in some places, wherever the wind decided it wanted to go next. And Londoners who had seen fires before, who had even survived big ones, were only just beginning to realise this wasn't going to be like last time. This one wasn't going to stop. You can smell it before you see it. Not smoke, not anymore. That's old news. You've been breathing smoke for hours and it's already soaked into your skin like ink into cloth. No, this smell is worse. Oily. Sticky. It clings to your nose and turns your stomach. It's pitch and tar and whale oil and spice. A smell that shouldn't be burning. A smell that says something expensive is about to die. You stumble onto Thames Street just in time to see the warehouses go up. They don't burn like houses. They detonate, one after another, like firecrackers strung along a merchant's fuse. Roofs lifted clear off, walls thrown outward with all the grace of a kicked beehive. Whole buildings just cease to exist, replaced by roiling columns of flame that howl as they climb the sky. You cover your ears and still hear it in your chest. There's shouting, men trying to roll barrels into the river, spices, wine, salt, tallow. Someone's pushing crates into a boat and screaming for oarsmen who have already abandoned ship. A dog is howling, trapped in the rubble. You want to help, you want to run, you want to wake up, But this is real. You are here, and it's only getting hotter. A cloud of burning pepper rides the breeze. It stings your eyes and gums. Somewhere nearby, someone is laughing like they've gone mad. Maybe they have. Maybe you will too. Because this part of the city isn't just burning, it's cooking. Cooking itself. The warehouse district was the lifeblood of London's economy, and the perfect accelerant for a fire that had grown ambitious. Packed into the dockside streets were mountains of flammable goods, tallow for candles, pitch for ships, tobacco for pipe-smoking nobles, and barrels upon barrels of brandy, wine, and spirits. Everything flammable, aromatic, or explosive had a storage address here. When the fire reached these warehouses, it didn't need time to build. It erupted. Liquors combusted mid-air. Resin drums burst into flaming shrapnel. And worst of all, the spices. You don't think of cinnamon or pepper as deadly, but in concentrated quantity, suspended in the air with enough heat, they become an irritant strong enough to blind, choke, and disable. Eyewitnesses described clouds of burning spice swirling through the streets like the city was exhaling fire. Some later claimed they never again touched a clove without remembering that choking sting. Entire blocks were wiped out in minutes. Buildings didn't collapse from the bottom up. They exploded from the inside out. Eyewitness accounts describe walls bowing outward like sails in a storm before disintegrating. And there was no stopping it. Not with buckets, not with prayers, not with whatever hope people had carried with them out of their homes. Some tried to float their belongings across the Thames, only to find that burning debris followed them there, turning the water into a second battlefield. Others ran with carts piled so high they couldn't see over the top, easy targets for thieves, stray sparks, or overturned cobbles. The fire, now fully possessed, had consumed more than homes. It had eaten the city's wealth, its trade, its lifeblood, and it wasn't done. Because next, it was heading for the heart of the city. You've stopped running, not because you're safe, but because there's nowhere left to run. Every street is choked. Horses rear, carts overturn, children scream for parents who have already vanished into the smoke. You're standing in the middle of what used to be Cheapside, or maybe Cornhill. The signs are gone, the buildings are indistinguishable, and everything smells like hot metal and wet fear. Someone shoves past you dragging a sack that jangles. Coins or cutlery. You can't tell. Someone else drops a mattress in the street and starts clawing it open, searching for something they were certain they'd hidden inside. You hear a man crying, loudly, openly. He's wearing a judge's robe and clutching a broken birdcage, and above it all, behind it all, the fire keeps roaring. You try to make your way toward the river, but the streets are no longer streets. They're rivers of people, furniture, livestock, and smoke. A woman passes you carrying a teacup and nothing else. A boy throws a Bible into a wheelbarrow full of dolls. Every face you see wears the same expression, the bare, unvarnished look of someone who has stopped believing the world will ever return to normal. There is no order, no plan, no salvation on the horizon. There is only now, and now is burning. By sunrise on Monday, London had entered full-blown catastrophe. The fire had spread beyond the wealthy warehouses and commercial streets, and was now driving directly into the tightly packed residential quarters of the medieval city. The narrow alleys were so thick with smoke and bodies that people couldn't tell which direction the fire was coming from. Many simply moved in circles, desperate for an opening that didn't exist. There was no central authority. The city had no fire service, no coordinated emergency response. The Lord Mayor had disappeared from view after his infamous "woman could piss it out" blunder. The king had not yet taken command. For most Londoners, it was now every man, woman and child for themselves. People threw belongings into the streets, into carts, into the river. Boatmen, sensing opportunity, began charging obscene fees to ferry possessions across the Thames. Some took the money and never returned. Others took the cargo and claimed the fire got it, even if it hadn't. Thieves, looters and opportunists moved among the refugees like smoke through rafters. If a home hadn't burned yet, it was probably being emptied, not by the owner, but by someone faster. Even makeshift rescuers began demanding payment before helping to move belongings, and when people refused, the helpers helped themselves. The wealthy had their own problems. Goldsmiths and merchants attempted to remove ledgers and valuables from their businesses, only to find that their carts couldn't navigate the chaos. Horses bolted, wheels broke. What couldn't be saved was abandoned, and those with nowhere to run, they began sleeping outside the city, in fields, on roads, by the riverbanks, some barefoot, some bleeding, some still holding onto keys for doors that no longer existed. The city hadn't just lost its buildings, it had lost its ability to function. London, for all its pride and pedigree, had become a disorganised herd of the terrified. And somewhere in that herd, someone shouted that the cathedral was on fire. You didn't vote for the mayor, you don't even remember his name. But right now, standing barefoot in a pile of someone else's curtains, breathing smoke through a ripped sleeve, you are very clear on one thing. Whoever that man is, he's ruined everything. Word spreads through the crowd like fire through kindling. The mayor has refused to act, not can't. Not tried and failed, just refused. Said the fire wasn't serious, said it would burn itself out, said, and you hear this repeated more than once as if people can't believe it, that a woman could piss it out. You think about that line as you watch an entire row of houses collapse into a boiling pit of flame. Then you imagine the mayor, Lord Thomas Bloodworth, someone hisses, sipping wine while London turns into a funeral pyre. You feel something shift, not in the fire, in the people. The shouting is different now, not just panic, anger. Someone's throwing bricks, someone else is sobbing about their landlord, and above you the sky's no longer blue or even orange, it's just ash-coloured, like the whole world has been dipped in regret. And the mayor, he's already gone. Lord Thomas Bloodworth, the Lord Mayor of London in 1666, is not remembered fondly. That's putting it generously. In the earliest hours of the fire, he was summoned to Pudding Lane and urged to approve the demolition of buildings, the only known method of stopping a citywide blaze. The strategy was simple. Remove structures in the fire's path, deny it fuel, and create a fire break. It was desperate. It was brutal. But it worked. It always had. Bloodworth, however, hesitated. The buildings under threat weren't just houses. They were owned by wealthy merchants, people who had helped put him in office, people who might sue, or complain, or simply stop inviting him to dinner. So, rather than risk political blowback, he stood in front of a rising inferno and reportedly said, "A woman could piss it out." He then went back to bed. No official demolitions were ordered that night. No coordinated defences were mounted, and by the time anyone else had the authority to make those decisions, the fire had grown too large, too fast, too violent to be stopped by anything less than divine intervention, which notably did not arrive. Bloodworth's inaction is now considered one of the great bureaucratic blunders in disaster history. His name is invoked in the same breath as the Titanic's missing binoculars or Nero's fiddle, and while it's easy to mock him now, and many did even then, the consequences were far from funny. Because in those critical early hours, London had a window, a chance, a sliver of opportunity to stop the blaze before it became a legend. And Bloodworth closed that window, then drew the curtains, then walked away. You see a man carrying a chandelier, not just a candle holder, a full, gilded, 12-armed chandelier, swinging wildly as he runs, tangled in velvet drapes and muttered curses. Behind him, a butler pushes a wheelbarrow stacked with ledgers, a stuffed deer head, and an oil painting of a woman who looks as confused as you feel. This is Lombard Street, the money street. You've never walked here without being watched, until now. No one's watching anything. Doors hang open. Safes are split. Gold gleams in the soot, too hot to touch. The fire's licking the rooftops like it's trying to taste who's richest. A banker shoulders past you, wheezing under the weight of what might be a family Bible, or possibly just a very expensive box. You hear someone shout, "The exchange is going!" and suddenly everyone moves faster. This isn't just about escape anymore. It's about salvage. About grabbing whatever legacy, luxury, or scrap of worth can be torn from the jaws of the fire before it becomes just another column of smoke. You wonder for a moment what you would run back in for. A coat? A letter? A loaf of bread? Then you hear a roof collapse and remember, none of it matters now. As the fire advanced westward into the commercial districts, it entered the city's economic heart, Lombard Street, Cornhill, the Royal Exchange, and the Goldsmiths' Row. These weren't slums or back streets. These were fortified outposts of wealth, but their riches made them uniquely combustible. Counting houses were filled with parchment, ledgers, sealed contracts, and dry timber furniture. Shops were stuffed with inventory, cloth, books, spices, and every other flammable luxury of the Restoration economy. And the residents, they didn't flee, not right away. Goldsmiths, merchants, and bankers attempted to remove valuables before the fire reached their doors. Some hired carts, which now demanded 10, 20, even 30 times the normal rate. Others took to the river, loading possessions onto barges, but demand outstripped supply. Thieves followed the chaos, and the wind gave no one time to think twice. Robert Viner, a prominent goldsmith, and future Lord Mayor, perhaps not coincidentally, famously carted his valuables out under armed guard and sent them to Windsor Castle. Other merchants weren't so lucky, or weren't quite as fast. One eyewitness described silver pouring from the upper floors of a burning counting house like molten water, followed by a floorboard collapse that sent several £1,000s worth of currency into the flames in seconds. Then came the Royal Exchange, the symbolic centre of London's global trade. It had survived previous disasters, it would not survive this one. The fire consumed it floor by floor, melting the bell, twisting ironwork into spider-leg sculptures, and igniting the vast stacks of international goods in its vaults. Eyewitnesses said it burned so hot that even the stone steps glowed red. As the flames devoured coin and contract alike, social lines began to blur. Nobles stood beside fishmongers at the docks, all bargaining for space on boats. Some merchants paid to carry their furniture to the river, only to find the boat already full of someone else's belongings. Others buried their possessions in fields outside the city, or under rubble that would take years to clear. The economy, in short, was combusting in tandem with the city, and the fire, rich by it all, marched on. You see him out of the corner of your eye, a skinny man in a soot-blackened coat crouched beside a pile of half-burned timbers. He isn't crying, he isn't fleeing, he's grinning. You blink, thinking you've imagined it. But no, he's real. And now he's crawling into the remains of a shop whose front half just collapsed 30 seconds ago. The sign still reads, "Tobacconist." The flames haven't reached it yet, but they will. Moments later, the man staggers out holding 3 sacks that reek of pipeweed and panic. He looks around, coughs, and jogs off into the smoke, vanishing like a magician at the end of a show. And just like that, you realise as he's not alone. They're everywhere. Dozens of them. Some bold, some quiet, all of them working fast. One woman is filling a sack with spoons. A boy hauls a sack that clinks like coins. 2 men carry a door between them, loaded with silver candlesticks and a squawking hen. They're not fighting the fire. They're not helping neighbours. They're shopping, at sword point, at speed. You want to be angry, but part of you understands. After all, what would you take if no one was looking and the world was already ash? As the city burned, its social order cracked, and through those cracks slipped every form of opportunist London had to offer. Looting during the fire was rampant. Some of it was frantic, people grabbing what they could in the name of survival. Others were organised, calculated. Even professional reports speak of entire gangs sweeping through half-emptied buildings, stripping valuables in minutes and melting back into the smoke. In the wealthier wards, men posed as rescuers, offering to cart belongings to safety, for a fee. In many cases, the carts and the helpers disappeared entirely, never to be seen again. Some merchants lost more to these rescuers than to the fire itself. In one infamous case, a man was caught stripping lead from a rooftop as it smouldered. He claimed it was for repair. Witnesses claimed otherwise. He was found dead the next day, bludgeoned or crushed, no one was quite sure. The chaos of the fire made prosecution nearly impossible. Most constables had either joined the crowds or simply given up. Courts were inaccessible. Paper records, including warrants, had literally gone up in smoke. King Charles II eventually offered a brief amnesty. Anyone who had stolen items during the fire could return them to designated stations, no questions asked. The idea was to recover essential goods. In reality, most people kept what they took, and who could blame them? The logic was brutal but simple. If your house was gone, your job was gone, your neighbours were gone. Why should the rules stay? Disaster, it turns out, doesn't just reveal character, it rearranges it. You see the glow first, not ahead of you, but above, like the sky itself is lit from beneath, like dawn, if dawn screamed. You reach Ludgate Hill and stop. Everyone does. No one moves forward. Even the shouting dies down. Because ahead of you, St. Paul's Cathedral is burning. It shouldn't be. It can't be. The walls are stone. The roof is lead. The place is older than memory and holier than anything that's ever burst into flame. But you're watching it happen. The windows are gone, shattered by heat or fear. A golden light pulses from inside, steady as a heartbeat. Then comes the sound. Not a crack or a roar, but something worse. A groan. Deep. Heavy. Like the building itself knows what's coming. You see books fly, thousands of them. Pages swirling into the sky like ash-winged birds burning mid-air. The air smells like wax, leather, and human failure. Then the roof collapses. Not in pieces. All at once. A tidal wave of smoke and sparks explodes upward, and you stumble backward, shielding your face. Someone near you falls. Someone else prays. But mostly people just watch, as the heart of London folds in on itself like parchment in flame. St. Paul's Cathedral was never meant to burn. Its stone walls and towering vaults were thought impervious, an ancient sanctuary built to outlast plagues, kings, and time itself. But in 1666 its very greatness became its undoing. In the days before the fire reached it, printers and booksellers had moved their goods into the cathedral's crypt for safekeeping. The logic was sound. Thick walls, no windows, sacred ground. But paper is patient, and paper burns. Scaffolding clung to the structure, part of an ongoing renovation. That scaffolding, made of dry timber and cloth, caught first, then the wooden roof, then the contents inside, centuries of records, article furniture, and most damning of all, the books. Eyewitnesses reported that flaming volumes burst from the windows like cannon shot. Some tried to catch them. Most could only shield their eyes as the fire wrote its own gospel across the skyline. When the lead roof melted, it poured like rain, cascading down Ludgate Hill in rivulets of molten silver. Eyewitnesses swore they saw it run in the gutters, hissing as it cooled. By nightfall, the great cathedral was gone. Not just damaged, gone. A hollowed shell of cracked stone and smouldering ghosts. Its loss was more than architectural. It was symbolic. If St. Paul's could fall, so could anything. Shops, homes, banks, even faith itself. The fire had stopped being a tragedy. It had become a kind of judgment. And it wasn't finished. You think the fire's behind you, you've run for hours, streets, alleys, rooftops, all swallowed. But here, finally, you've reached stone walls and open space. Nothing left to burn. It has to stop now. And then your neighbour's roof bursts into flames. Not from contact. Not from a creeping ember or glowing doorway. The flames just appear. Like the air itself decided to ignite. People scream. Again. You don't even flinch this time. You turn to run. Again. And a man shouts, "How did it get here?" No one answers, because no one knows. That's when it hits you. It's not moving, it's jumping, like it's skipping forward in time, like it already knows where it wants to go next, and suddenly you're not running from a fire, you're running from a mind. By Tuesday, the Great Fire of London was behaving in a way that even seasoned observers struggled to explain. It no longer moved street by street. It leapt. Entire buildings caught fire despite having empty lots between them. Embers travelled great distances, igniting rooftops no flame had ever touched. We now understand this as a phenomenon called spotting, when burning fragments from an intense fire are carried aloft by wind and drop miles away, starting new fires on contact. It's common in wildland fires, rare in cities, almost unheard of in a city made of stone, tile and hope. But 1666 London was a perfect storm. The buildings, packed tightly, offered no natural breaks. The timber frames were tinder dry. The wind remained steady and aggressive, acting like bellows at a forge, and the fire itself had reached temperatures high enough to create its own weather, sucking oxygen, warping air pressure, and launching firebrands like arrows from a siege engine. Firefighters, such as they were, had no training in this kind of behaviour. Most had buckets, leather fire squirts or fire hooks. None of those worked when your house ignited from a burning piece of paper launched 4 blocks away. One eyewitness reported watching a flame fall from the sky onto a friend's chimney, setting the house alight within seconds. Others described showers of fire or rains of glowing ash that stuck to clothing and set thatch alight. This was no longer a localised disaster. It was, in the terminology of modern firefighting, an urban firestorm, a rare and terrifying state in which the fire spreads faster than it can be tracked, let alone contained. And worst of all, and there were still 2 days left to burn, you hear someone shout, "The king is here." You almost laugh. The king? Here? In this question mark? But the voice repeats it, louder now, and people begin turning toward the river. A cluster of mounted men push through the smoke, their horses skittish, their faces grim. And there he is, Charles II. Long black hair, cloak dark with soot, shouting over the roar of the blaze. Doesn't seem real. He dismounts, grabs a helmet, not gold, not ceremonial, just dented iron, and begins barking orders. The Duke of York is beside him, sleeves rolled up, directing men like a general under siege. You watch the crowd shift, not stop panicking, not stop fleeing, but start listening. A line of buckets forms, axes appear, barrels are rolled into place, and for the first time in 3 days, the chaos has shape. You're still surrounded by fire, but now it feels like someone is trying, and for now, that's enough. By Wednesday, the fire had destroyed thousands of homes, dozens of churches, and most of the city's financial district. Morale was crumbling. Authority had evaporated. London was no longer functioning as a city. It was behaving like a battlefield without a general. Enter King Charles II. History remembers Charles as a rake, a wit, and a man who loved entertainment more than governance. But during the Great Fire, he proved something else. When London needed a leader, he showed up with a shovel. Rather than issuing decrees from Whitehall, Charles rode into the city, personally overseeing firebreak efforts. He worked alongside the Duke of York, his younger brother, and future King James II, to coordinate bucket brigades, demolitions, and firefighting posts. They did not wear armour. They did not give speeches. They gave orders, and more importantly, got results. The king offered generous payments to anyone willing to help pull down houses in the fire's path. This financial incentive brought in labourers, tradesmen, and desperate citizens who hadn't dared act without compensation or permission. Charles also directed the use of gunpowder to demolish buildings too stubborn for axes. It was dangerous, imprecise, and terrifying, but effective. Explosions tore open corridors of air, depriving the fire of fuel. These newly created firebreaks, combined with a slight shift in wind, finally slowed the fire's advance. The presence of the king, blackened, shouting, visible, did more than organise manpower. It reignited something nearly lost, the idea that London was still worth saving, and in those last brutal hours that was enough to tip the scale. You've reached the edge, not metaphorically, literally. The eastern end of the city lies ahead, and beyond it the Tower of London looms in the smoke like a blackened sentinel. You've always seen it as a fortress, impenetrable, eternal. But now, it looks nervous. And it should be. The fire is coming. Not far now. A few more streets. You can feel it. The heat, the pressure, the vibration of collapsing timbers and cracking stones behind you. The tower isn't just some old castle. It's a powder keg. Beneath those stone walls sit thousands of barrels of gunpowder, muskets, cannons, enough to unmake what's left of the city, and maybe the island. And then you hear it. Not the fire, not screaming, not bells, explosions, controlled, sharp, repeating. The tower's defenders are blowing up the city on purpose, to save it. The fire had already consumed most of central London by the time it turned eastward toward the tower, but while the western districts had wealth and history, the east had gunpowder. The Tower of London, one of the city's oldest and most fortified landmarks, was still in active military use in 1666. Within its walls were vast stores of weaponry, including over 9,000 barrels of gunpowder, enough to obliterate half the city if ignited. There was no margin for error. King Charles and his brother ordered the creation of massive firebreaks around the tower and surrounding eastern wards. The only problem? There wasn't time for axes or manpower. The fire was too close, the wind too strong, the buildings too dense. So they turned to the one thing fire fears, a bigger explosion. Gunpowder demolitions had been used earlier in the firefighting effort, tentatively, experimentally. But near the tower, they became a primary weapon. Entire blocks were razed in minutes with tightly packed charges blasted into rubble before the fire could touch them. The danger was enormous. Poorly placed charges could hurl burning debris. Explosions could trigger fires just as easily as stop them. But the demolition crews were fast, precise, and, most of all, lucky. The tactic worked. The fire, starved of fuel and confronted by open air and collapsed streets, slowed, then hesitated, then finally stopped. By Thursday morning, the worst was over. Smoke still hung over the city like a canopy of mourning. Ash still fell like snow. But the roar had quieted. The embers hissed. The tower had held. The fire had been denied its final conquest. And London, battered, blackened, half blind, had somehow survived. You thought it would be quiet. Not peaceful. London will never be peaceful again. But quieter. After 4 days of running, choking, burying and weeping, the silence is almost painful. Like your ears don't trust it. Like you expect another explosion at any moment, you sit in a field with thousands of others, watching smoke rise from a horizon that doesn't exist anymore. Ash covers your sleeves. The air smells like someone tried to burn a library, a bakery and a church, all at once, because they did. And then someone next to you says, "The French did it." You blink. What? The French, or the Dutch, or the Catholics. The woman gestures to the black cloud hanging over London like an accusation. They say it was deliberate. You want to laugh, but you don't, because she's not the only one saying it. All around you, voices are rising again, not in fear this time, but in fury, pointing fingers, naming names. The fire is gone, but the heat is still here, and now it's looking for someone to blame. When the smoke cleared, London was a city in ruins and in shock. Over 13,000 homes gone, entire wards flattened, 87 parish churches turned to rubble, 65,000 people suddenly homeless. But numbers don't satisfy pain, and they certainly don't explain why. In the absence of answers, London turned to its oldest coping mechanism, blame. Almost immediately, whispers began. The fire had started too fast, spread too perfectly, burned too hot. It couldn't have been an accident. Surely it was foreign sabotage. England was, after all, at war with both France and the Dutch Republic. That made every foreigner a potential arsonist. Rumours spread like aftershocks, of Frenchmen hurling grenades, of Dutch spies lighting powder kegs, of strange men seen near the bakery that night. Mob justice followed. A Frenchman was beaten in the street for carrying tennis balls mistaken for bombs. A Swedish diplomat narrowly escaped lynching. An Irish woman was attacked because her accent sounded suspicious. One foreigner was nearly hanged until the Duke of York himself intervened. Then came Robert Hubert, a mentally ill French watchmaker's son. Hubert had been nowhere near Pudding Lane when the fire started. But under interrogation he confessed, claiming he was part of a French plot to burn the city. Why he said this remains unclear. Coercion, confusion, desperation for relevance. Regardless, the authorities latched onto it. He was convicted in record time. Never mind that Hubert later changed his story, or that he clearly didn't understand the timeline, or that even the judges doubted him. He was foreign, French, and available. He was hanged weeks later, and with that London felt satisfied, not healed but vindicated. The fire had a face now, a culprit, a neat little scapegoat swinging from the gallows. But the finger-pointing didn't stop there. Anti-Catholic sentiment, always simmering in post-Reformation England, erupted like another firestorm. People remembered old warnings, dreams, portents, cryptic remarks from papists overheard in taverns. A Protestant named William Tisdale claimed he'd heard a Catholic say 1666 would bring a sad desolation. That was enough for some. Pamphlets were printed, accusations flew, and years later, plaques were still being erected blaming barbarous papists for the fire. One even stood at the site of the monument to the Great Fire, boldly declaring that London had burned because of Catholic malice. It wasn't removed until the 18th century, not because of decency, because it was causing traffic. The fire had turned wood to ash, iron to slag and glass to powder. But its most enduring casualty was truth. For many, the flames were easier to accept than the idea that something so monumental could happen without cause, that a city could fall because of a spark, that a world could collapse not from war or treason or divine punishment, but from carelessness. So they built another fire, one of paranoia, prejudice, and punishment. And it burned long after the embers went cold. You've slept on dirt for 3 nights. Your bed is a pile of clothes that didn't burn. Your pillow is your arm. The stars are clearer now. Not because the air is clean, but because the buildings that used to block your view are gone. Just gone. You're in Moorfields, or maybe Finsbury Fields. It doesn't matter anymore. They've all turned into one sprawling refugee camp, a quilt of ash-streaked faces and stories that no longer need telling. Everyone here lost something. Some lost everything. Some lost everyone. The ground is warm, still. The heat has baked the grass into a brown crust, and it curls under your bare feet when you stand. You try not to stand much. There's nowhere to go, and nowhere to go back to. A man near you is eating turnips, raw. A woman is bartering lace for bread. A boy has turned his grandmother's silver teapot into a chamber pot. People mutter, some pray. One man keeps screaming that it was all a punishment for pies. No one asks what that means. The city behind you is still smouldering. The future ahead of you is still missing. After the Great Fire was finally extinguished, Londoners emerged from the smoke to face a second catastrophe: homelessness. More than 65,000 people, over 80% of the city within the medieval walls, had no shelter. Their homes were gone, their neighbours scattered. The very ground still radiated heat, too hot to walk barefoot. Entire families took to open fields beyond the city, sleeping rough under tarps, carts, or nothing at all. There were no public shelters, no emergency services, no coordinated aid from the government. Refugees congregated wherever they could, in Moorfields, Spitalfields, across the Thames, or in the ruins themselves. Sanitation, predictably, was non-existent. Drinking water was contaminated, waste piled up. Disease hovered nearby, looking for an opening. Meanwhile, the economic aftershocks began to hit. Landlords demanded rent on homes that no longer stood. The Fire Court, a tribunal hastily created to settle disputes between tenants and property owners, was heavily skewed in favour of landowners. Tenants were told, in essence, that a burned house was still a house, legally speaking, and if they wanted to live in the rubble, they still had to pay for the privilege. Rents skyrocketed. Prices followed. Within days, the cost of leasing a property had doubled. Within weeks, it had tripled. Tradesmen, widows, labourers, people who had just watched their lives dissolve in flame, now found themselves extorted by the same system that had failed to protect them. Some gave up and left the city entirely, moving to nearby villages or seeking shelter with distant relatives. Others stayed and began building makeshift homes out of debris, timber, and scraps of canvas. A few found work in the clean-up itself, hauling stone, removing corpses, or clearing the streets of molten lead and charred beams. It was dangerous, filthy labour, but it was paid, and in a city made of ash, money still mattered. Survivors didn't rebuild their lives with blueprints or optimism. They rebuilt them with sweat, resentment, and a stubborn refusal to disappear. London had burned, but somehow Londoners hadn't. You return to the city days later thinking the worst is over. It isn't. The fire is out, yes. The flames are dead, the smoke thinning. But London is not what you remember. It's not even something you recognise. The streets are gone. Landmarks vanished. The neighbourhoods where you learn to walk, barter, pray and swear, flattened. Even the sounds are different now. No chatter, no clatter, no bells. Just the soft, endless crunch of ash underfoot. You step over blackened beams that used to be houses, piles of scorched pewter that used to be table settings, a shoe that still looks wearable, until you notice the charred leather curled in on itself like it tried to escape. There's no colour anywhere, just grey. Grey sky, grey stones, grey fingers as you touch what's left of your front step. The only thing that breaks the palate is the occasional patch of blood where a nail was stepped on, or a collapsed wall finally gave way under its own sadness. You close your eyes and try to remember how it used to look, but your brain won't let you. All it shows you is this. The world is a ruin, and it smells like it might never stop burning. When the final embers cooled, London was not merely damaged, it was decimated. Over 400 acres of the city had been reduced to rubble. 13,200 homes were gone. 87 churches collapsed into heaps of stone and twisted lead. The Royal Exchange, Guildhall and St Paul's Cathedral were all annihilated. At the time, officials estimated the damage at £10 million, an inconceivable sum in 1666, roughly equivalent to over £2.5 billion today. For context, England's annual income from taxation at the time was around £1 million. The fire didn't just destroy property, it gutted the nation's economic heart. And yet, only 6 deaths were officially recorded. Historians have long called that number absurd. Most believe it was a reflection not of the fire's mercy, but of its efficiency. Bodies were likely incinerated entirely, leaving no remains to count, no names to write down. The poor, the elderly, the undocumented, they vanished, literally into smoke. The surviving city was a skeleton. Stone walls stood where wooden beams had collapsed. Doorways led nowhere. Chimneys pointed skyward like gravestones for the homes they used to warm. And among it all, life resumed. Markets popped up amid the rubble. Children played on heaps of broken brick. Vendors sold ash-dusted apples and scorched loaves as if nothing had changed. Because, in a way, everything had, which meant anything could be normal now. But recovery was a patchwork of triumphs and humiliations. Some Londoners had buried valuables in their gardens or cellars before fleeing. They returned to dig them up, only to find melted metal, soaked paper, or that they'd misremembered the spot entirely. Others returned to confront landlords demanding back rent for homes that had been reduced to footprints in the earth. The fire court created by Parliament to resolve property disputes frequently ruled that rent was still owed, even if your roof was now a memory. And the opportunists didn't stop when the flames did. Scavengers picked through ruins for scrap metal, coins, or anything they could sell. Some claimed squatters' rights over flattened lots. One man was found trying to charge rent for a church's front steps. Even the government found itself unsure how to proceed. A few nobles proposed relocating the entire city, flattening what remained and rebuilding elsewhere. But Charles II knew better. London could burn, but it could not move. Its people were here. Its trade was here. Its soul, singed as it was, had roots. The city would rebuild, but not yet. Not today. Today, the ash still falls. You don't have a home anymore. But worse than that, you don't even have an address to miss. There's nothing to point to. No burned foundation or blackened chimney. No door you can stand in front of and say, "This used to be mine." It's all gone. Erased. Like the fire reached inside the map and scrubbed your street from history. So you do what thousands of others do. You drift. First to the fields outside the walls, open spaces like Moorfields, Spitalfields or Finsbury Fields, where the air is clearer and the ground is cooler. But even there it's hard. You sleep under a cart, wrapped in your uncle's coat. You dig a shallow pit to cook turnips and dry your socks. Your neighbour has turned her hat into a grain sack. Everyone here wears the same uniform, soot and survival. No one knows how long they'll stay. Days, weeks, a season. One woman insists the city will be rebuilt by Christmas. Another says she's never coming back. You look at your hands, scratched, blistered, covered in ash. You remember them being good at sewing, or carpentry, or scrubbing floors. Now they're just good at carrying what little you have left. And when the wind blows from the west, you still smell it. The fire, long gone, still hiding in the air like a secret no one wants to retell. In the wake of the Great Fire, tens of thousands of Londoners became instant exiles. Not refugees from war or foreign invasion, but from their own city. They fled not to safety, but to absence. Moorfields, a marshy common ground just outside the city walls, became an impromptu tent city. So did Spitalfields, Finsbury, and any other patch of land not already claimed by landlords or livestock. The wealthiest fled to relatives in the countryside. The middle class camped in carts, sheds, or borrowed cellars, and the poorest simply slept on the ground, hungry, exposed, and forgotten. Contemporary writers described the fields as miserable villages of tarpaulin, salvaged wood, and fire-warped iron. One diarist noted that people built entire shanty towns from the debris of their old homes, or doors turned into walls, window shutters used as roofs. There were no toilets, no clean water, no medical aid, and no one in power seemed to know what to do. Parliament offered sympathy but not solutions. The king gave orders to prevent further panic, but with no housing to offer, those orders were little more than theatre. Church officials tried to provide food, but distribution was erratic and plagued by corruption. The poor fought over stale bread. The sick were abandoned. The plague pits, unused for a year, became tempting once again. And yet in the ash, people adapted. Children played with melted spoons. A carpenter offered to build shelters in exchange for cheese. A widow traded her husband's scorched violin for a pair of boots. Life didn't pause, it shifted. Some built communities, others turned feral. Crime surged, not out of cruelty but desperation. A man was caught stealing cabbage from a sleeping neighbour. When asked why, he said, "Because hunger is faster than law." There were heroes too. Neighbours who shared food without asking for coin. Priests who gave up their tents to shelter the elderly. Midwives who tended to births under broken wagons. But no matter how noble or grim their days, all exiles shared one thing: no home to return to. Some would never rebuild, some would never stop grieving, and others, many others, would never be seen again, their names disappearing into parish records lost among the smoke. They were not listed on monuments, not quoted in journals, not buried with markers, but for a time they were the majority. London's people sleeping in fields, dreaming of hearths that no longer existed. And they were still there, waiting, when the architects arrived with their plans and promises. You don't trust the sky anymore, it's blue now, which feels like a lie. The clouds drift gently, and the air smells of dirt instead of ash. But you know better. You remember how fast everything turned, how light became fire, how roofs vanished in the time it took to pray. And yet, here you are, hammer in hand, watching the scaffolding rise. Not just yours, everyone's. New beams, new bricks, new stone, being laid with cautious hands and skittish hearts. A boy walks by with a basket of nails. A widow sets out bread for the masons. Someone coughs and half the workers flinch. But no flames come. A man in a powdered wig walks through the street with a rolled-up plan under his arm. You don't know his name, but everyone says he's a genius, says he's going to build something beautiful, something fireproof. You try not to scoff, because beauty feels like a luxury, but the idea of safe? That sounds like something worth building. In the weeks and months after the fire, London did what London always does. It adapted. But this time, it did more than rebuild. It reimagined Dot. The first task was clearing rubble, a monumental job. The debris was deeper than a man's height in some places, and so hot in others that it smouldered weeks after the last flame. Labourers were paid to haul away beams, bricks and bones. Children picked through the waste for scrap metal. Oxen carts clogged the streets. Amid the smoke and soot walked a man named Christopher Wren. Architect, scientist and visionary, Wren was entrusted with designing a new London, one worthy of its suffering. His original plan was ambitious. Wide boulevards, rational grids, piazzas like Rome, grand sightlines like Paris. But reality and property claims had pulled it back to earth. Still, some of his vision stuck. Wider streets, brick and stone construction, a ban on overhanging jetties, and most notably, the crowning jewel of his career, the new saint. Paul's Cathedral, a phoenix in limestone. No more medieval clutter. This was bold, monumental, Renaissance reborn in English stone. Wren was just one of many. Surveyors, brickmakers, planners, all took part in what became one of the most extensive urban rebuilds in Western history. And with it came the birth of modern fire insurance. A businessman named Nicholas Barban seized the moment. He founded the Insurance Office for Houses, offering protection in case fire ever came again. Clients paid an annual premium and received a plaque, a fire mark, to hang above their door. If fire struck, the company would cover the cost of rebuilding. It was a revolutionary idea, and it worked. Within a decade, dozens of such companies emerged, each with their own fire brigades, early precursors to the modern fire service, and then, of course, there was the monument. Designed by Wren and Robert Hooke, it rose 202 feet high on Fish Street Hill, the exact distance from where the fire began. A towering column of Portland stone topped with a flaming urn, it stood as a reminder of what had burned and what had survived. For a time, a plaque at its base blamed the treachery and malice of the Popish faction for the blaze. That slander remained in place for over 150 years. Today, the plaque is gone. But the column still stands. London did not emerge unchanged. It emerged remade, physically, financially, architecturally. It lost its medieval shell, its labyrinthine streets, its timber bones. But it gained foresight, planning, a new skyline crowned by domes, not spires, and with it, the resilience to weather future storms as wars, bombs, plagues, and time. The fire took much, but it left behind something else, not just ashes. but space dot. And in that space, a city found its second breath. You see her at the edge of the field, standing, swaying. Her face is red, not flushed, raw. Her hands are wrapped in cloth that used to be white. You've seen her before, maybe 3 days ago, hauling a basket of bread through the smoke. Now she can't hold anything. Beside her, a man wheezes like every breath is a punishment. His eyes are pink. His beard is full of ash. A child nearby limps, her legs splinted with 2 spoons and a strip of curtain. Another sits in the grass, unmoving. You're not sure if she's asleep or dead. No one checks. No one knows how to help anymore. Bandages are rags, salves are mud, bleeding is prayer, and everywhere you turn someone is coughing. The kind of cough that rattles in the lungs and smells like yesterday's fire has moved inside them to stay. After the flames came the fevers. The Great Fire of London injured far more people than it officially killed. The burn victims alone were numerous, faces scorched by falling soot, hands blistered from hauling embers, lungs scarred from days of smoke inhalation. There were no burn wards, no disinfectants, no morphine. Treatments for burns in the 17th century included rose oil, pig fat, vinegar, or honey smeared on open wounds, sometimes urine, sometimes prayer. Infections were common, and sepsis was not yet understood. Those who survived the fire often died of what came after it. Wounds that festered, throats that swelled shut, and immune systems broken by exhaustion. Respiratory illness surged. The smoke had been so thick for so long that even those who escaped the flames began to fall ill. Pepys himself wrote of sore throats and hoarseness among all ranks. Physicians recorded smoky fever, a term used for persistent coughing, headaches and chills that often lingered for weeks, or killed within days. And those weren't the only illnesses. Crowded refugee camps outside the city were breeding grounds for typhus, dysentery, and other diseases of filth and close contact. With no sewers, clean water, or waste removal, even minor infections could turn deadly. People drank from stagnant ditches. They washed with soot-filled rain. The rats returned. Doctors were in short supply, and most still believed in balancing humours. Bleeding, purging, or leeches were prescribed, none of which helped with burns or smoke damage. Worse, many doctors had fled the city during the fire, taking their skills and tools with them. In their place came herbalists, quacks, and cunning folk, offering remedies made from moss, copper, or crushed beetles. Some worked, most didn't. But when your skin is peeling from your arm, you'll believe anything with a name. Children suffered most. Those who didn't die in the fire now faced starvation, infection, or abandonment. Orphaned and wandering, many were taken in by churches, which were often nothing more than stone shells and broken pews. The city's survivors weren't simply homeless. They were sick, wounded, and ignored, and they had no hospitals. St. Bartholomew's, the city's primary hospital, was damaged but survived. Others were gone. Makeshift clinics were established in tents, churchyards, or burnt-out shops. But they had little to offer beyond bandages, broth, and comfort. And still people got up. Still they swept their patch of dirt. Still they boiled their water and tried not to cry. Still they sat beside friends and strangers, offering cool cloths and holding hands when medicine ran out. In a city of ash and ruin, it wasn't brick that held people together. It was bodies, broken, burned, and breathing. You don't know when it started to feel like a city again. Maybe it was the sound of hammers in the morning. Maybe it was the first time you saw someone selling bread from a cart instead of begging for it. Or maybe it was the moment a child laughed, just laughed, without coughing, without fear, without asking for anything. The ash is mostly gone now. The air still tastes like smoke some mornings, but the sky's blue again, and the pigeons have started to return, stupid and unbothered. You pass a group of men hauling stone. One tips his cap to you, grinning through missing teeth. Another hums a hymn under his breath. Down the road, a new wall is going up. Brick and mortar, clean lines, wide spacing, no overhanging beams, no wood where there should be stone. You run your hand over it. It's rough, new. You look up and realise it. They're not rebuilding what was. They're building something better. London could have died in 1666. It could have become a relic, abandoned, blamed, reduced to stories told by survivors in faraway towns. But it didn't. It rebuilt, not overnight, not easily, and not without argument, scandal, or setbacks, But piece by piece, brick by brick, the city rose. King Charles II appointed commissioners to oversee reconstruction. Laws were passed mandating stone and brick construction, outlawing timber frames and jettied buildings. Streets were widened, water access was improved. The medieval maze gave way to early modern order. The architect Christopher Wren, together with Robert Hooke and others, offered bold designs, grand plans, new shapes. Most were rejected by property owners who insisted on rebuilding over their original plots. But many ideas remained, and over time they changed the face of the city. Wren's crowning achievement was St Paul's Cathedral bigger, brighter, resilient. A statement, not a memory. Its vast dome would one day survive another fire, the Blitz, becoming the city's eternal spine. And then there was the monument, 202 feet tall, standing on the site nearest to the fire's origin. Carved in stone, topped with a flaming urn, it bore Latin inscriptions detailing the destruction and the rebirth, and for a time, a completely fabricated line blaming the fire on Catholics, which remained in place until public embarrassment and traffic congestion finally brought it down. Beneath all of this grandeur was something more subtle. Londoners themselves, the bakers, masons, widows, cart pullers, and scribes who shovelled the ashes, stacked the bricks, stitched the wounds, and carried each other, literally and figuratively through the aftermath. They rebuilt churches, reopened taverns, replanted gardens. Some sang, some wept. Some simply went back to work and pretended nothing had happened, which was its own kind of triumph. And amid the ruins rose something new: fire insurance, urban planning, and a shared memory too stubborn to forget. Because London remembered. It remembered the fire that destroyed it, the failures that betrayed it, the hands that rebuilt it, and the people, bruised, coughing, barefoot, who refused to leave. In the end, the Great Fire of London was not the end of London. It was the beginning of the London we know now. Ordered, insured, paved, permanent. It is a city built not just on stone and sweat, but on loss. And if you walk the streets today, near Pudding Lane or beneath the monument, you'll still smell it sometimes, just faintly, the past still smouldering. And now, as the embers dim and the city falls quiet beneath a sky that once burned like judgment, I hope this descent into the Great Fire of London lingers, like the scent of smoke in cloth, or the silence that follows panic. You've walked through falling timbers, watched stone melt, and stood in the ruins where churches once stood tall. But now it's time to rest. The bells have stopped tolling, the fire has spent its fury, and for tonight, our story sinks softly into ash. If you're still awake, congratulations. You've survived another grim chapter of history. Hit subscribe so we can slip into another strange corner of the past tomorrow night. And as you drift, the soft crackle of fire will carry you deeper, far from the glowing rubble and into sleep.